Honourable Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So last week I had the opportunity to question the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry about steel and the effect of the carbon tax on steel. And it was incredible to hear the answer that this minister tried to pawn off on us, saying that the government has stood up for steel workers. Well, I've met with steel workers, I've met with the steel industry, and I'm sure the minister has as well. And what the steel industry has said unequivocally is that if the carbon tax goes up, as it is scheduled to go up, there will be no steel industry left in Canada. So the government's plan to quadruple the carbon tax will effectively drive the entire steel industry in Canada out of business. If that's what standing up for steel workers means to this government, I think they've got the definition wrong. So what we've seen in the steel industry as a result of the carbon tax, so the carbon tax makes Canadian steel very expensive, far more expensive than all their competitors. And what we now see is that 61% of steel in Canada comes from foreign countries. They're imports. And every year it gets worse. Why? Because the carbon tax makes Canadian steel far more expensive than any other steel in the world. And in fact, the country's now being flooded with very cheap, very dirty Chinese steel. So Chinese steel is 2 times more polluting with carbon emissions, more than 2 times, than Canadian steel. And so what this government is doing is driving out the steel business in this country. Steel accounts for about 120,000 direct and indirect jobs in this country. The carbon tax is going to effectively kill those jobs. We know that the carbon tax has done a whole bunch of things. We now have 2 million people going to a food bank because the carbon tax has made food so expensive. We have tent cities all across the entire country, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, because housing has become so expensive under this Liberal government. My question to the minister was this: if you think that the carbon tax is so great, and it's going to be so beneficial, not only for Canadian steelworkers, but so beneficial for Canadians in general, why don't they just call a carbon tax election and let Canadians decide? Because I think they will unequivocally and resoundingly say they've had enough of the carbon tax. So my question tonight again is, the carbon tax is driving jobs out of this country. It's making food more expensive. It's getting Canadians to line up at food banks because they can't afford food. If they're so confident that the carbon tax is working so well, will they call a carbon tax election? If not, why not?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I won't be able to answer his question, but les coûts des changements climatiques.
The cost of climate change is clear. Canadians want to be part of the answer, and so do businesses. Innovative businesses of all sizes continue to meet consumer demand for low-emission carbon products and are investing massively to adapt their production accordingly.
The member opposite should know that Canada's steel producers are leading the way. For example, just this year, ArcelorMittal Dafasco earned Responsible Steel certification, recognizing the company's leadership in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, noise, emissions effluents, as well as waste and water stewardship and biodiversity. In Canada, we use carbon pricing because it works. It creates powerful financial incentives for industries and individuals to take concrete steps to reduce their emissions. And in fact, in the member opposite's riding of Dufferin-Caledon, over 80,000 people received the Canada carbon rebate. L'approche du Canada.
Canada's approach to carbon pricing is flexible. Industries from all sectors have stated that they support carbon pricing because of this flexibility. And they've stated that putting a price on pollution allows them to invest in cleaner processes without any heavy-handed government intervention. Carbon pricing is an economic policy that works by guaranteeing that our industries continue to be competitive in a decarbonized world. The federal system allows provinces and territories to maintain their own system if it meets minimum national standards. Since 2019, we've put in place carbon pricing across Canada. Several provinces, such as Alberta, BC, and Quebec, were already applying carbon pricing long ago.
All of the money paid by industries gets given right back to the province where it comes from to invest in clean energy projects for industry. For every dollar that's been invested in industry through these pricing proceeds, $3 have been mobilized, essentially tripling investment in clean industrial projects. By putting a price on pollution, we send a signal across the economy to encourage households and businesses to change their behavior, find new and innovative ways to use less polluting energy, products, and services.
The industry remains competitive, both thanks to incentives offered by carbon pricing, to develop new technologies, and thanks to a smart design of pricing for heavy industry across Canada. Our approach allows overall costs to be kept low while continuing to foster emissions reduction and maintain Canada's competitiveness abroad. That's why many economists support carbon pricing as the most effective and least costly tool that we have to fight climate change. Carbon pricing is a key pillar of Canada's climate plan because it reduces emissions, expedites the use of technologies and clean fuel, and supports good jobs in a diversified economy, but also because it completes and amplifies the impacts of the other elements of our climate plan. Carbon pricing lays the groundwork for over 140 measures of Canada's emissions reduction plan, such as the clean fuel regulation that reduces carbon intensity in gas and diesel in Canada, and the electricity regulation project, which will allow for a net zero electric network.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
It's almost impossible to respond coherently to that answer. So, look, the steel industry has made it very clear. If the carbon tax continues to go up, they will be out of business. I know the investments they've made. They produce the greenest steel in the world, and they should be rewarded for that. Instead, what the government's doing is punishing them for that by promising to quadruple the carbon tax. So the fact is, she can say what she wants, that she thinks carbon pricing is great. The steel industry is on the record saying if the carbon tax goes up as planned, they will be completely out of business. 61% of the Canadian steel market is already taken up by cheap, dirty steel imports. The industry itself is saying this will be the end of us. How can that member stand here and say it's working when the industry says it's going to put them out of business?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And because full of economists are saying the same. Canadians across the country are raising the alarm on climate change. They can see it with their own eyes. Longer, fiercer wildfire seasons, hottest summers in history, floods in urban and rural areas across the country over the last few years, and I could go on. Experts tell us that from 2015 to 2025, climate change impacts will have shaved $25 billion off the GDP. That's half a year's growth. Without significant additional actions to reduce emissions, these costs are projected to grow to $35 billion in 2030. This is what scientists predict a long time ago. We need to take ambitious action now to avoid drastic changes to the trajectory of the climate on Earth. And pricing pollution is an essential strategy because, Madam Speaker, it simply can be free to pollute.